I mean, even this is something I wanted to talk to you about in relationship to this, the whole notion of development and reincarnation and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
I was speaking with one of my students who's doing a piece on this, and we were saying that because often, what people report, people report that they experience after, after consciousness is free to release from the body, tends to differ, and often it's very personal, and often has to do with culture and the unconscious, et cetera, et cetera. But what I was wondering was, and thinking that if this fundamental identification from the individual and collective ego had really been transcended, one had begun to really, surrender and give oneself to this creative thrust, this creative drive, at the deepest level, then I would imagine that when consciousness, released itself from the body, that one would most likely begin to see and feel that God urge as consciousness, free from and transcending these personal, and cultural and subconscious, demons and ghosts and endless amounts of time, and begin and experience that same kind of intensity, free from all this.
Yeah.
It's kind of.
Yeah. Well, that's.
And so few people ever report anything like that because very few people were.
Well, they're all Shirley MacLaine. I mean, they all.
Right.
The Dalai Lama can't remember his past lives, but Shirley's in there building pyramids and shit. The traditions, there's kind of a fairly common understanding in the traditions, including the Catholic Church up to about the 4th century, and that is that basically the soul, if you want to call it that, is a repository of two fundamental capacities. One is your virtue, and one is your wisdom. And this is what transmigrates from life to life according to the general traditions. Virtue is the subtotal of the good deeds that you've done. Wisdom is always defined as capacity to understand emptiness. So, in a sense, this is absolute and relative truth. Your capacity to understand absolute truth is your capacity to understand Godhead, your capacity to understand Nirguna Brahma, the capacity to understand the transparency of this in every moment, just as it is as it's arising. And then virtue is your capacity within this arising to do good deeds. And so virtue is dualistic. You do good and avoid evil. And wisdom is non-dual. Wisdom sees the same identical suchness in good and evil. And so the theory generally is that it's this accumulation of wisdom and virtue that you carry from one life to another. You don't generally carry specific memories of when you were building the Eiffel Tower and that kind of thing. It's interesting that the only traditions that actually have theories of reincarnation are those that are in an agrarian base. So this is all, I find this very interesting. Number one. Number two, the karma that's ascribed to individuals is a fundamental mistake, I think, was made in terms of how the traditions treat karma. And that is they really didn't understand the 4 quadrants very well. They weren't differentiated very well. So things that happened in the other 3 quadrants were ascribed to something that you did in your interior. So if you get sick, you did it. If something bad happens to you, you did it. If you're blind, you did it. So the actual factors that could be operating in the other quadrants were ascribed to your personal volition. And that's probably a very, very deep mistake. That's not to say that there isn't karma. There is. But there's karma in all 4 quadrants. So if somebody dumps, the Exxon Valdez dumps toxic waste in your backyard, if you are a Jew at Auschwitz, you're not solely responsible for what's happening. That's a fundamental bad way to look at it. So you have to sort of straighten out exactly what is your karma. What are you responsible for? And then that, if anything, is what would go from lifetime to lifetime. But also you can just start by straightening out just what you are responsible for and what you aren't responsible for. That's a very, very important notion. Ultimately, if you're talking about Maha-Atma, if you're talking about I, if you're talking about witness, then you are responsible for everything that's arising. But that means everything. Because you are everything that's arising moment to moment. But your relative finite self is not. and you have to distinguish between which is which. Most people who first start getting into these things confuse these two, and they think that everything that happens to them is their own bad karma. And that's just a new age guilt trip that we really don't need. So these are things you sort of consider them in terms of how you come down on reincarnation. If sort of, people sort of have a sense about it one way or another. Shankara probably had the final say, where he said the Lord is the one and only transmigrant. And that probably ends that one. So.
But as the Lord transmigrates, the degree to which he, she, or it is realized,
that's right.
And now more in an evolutionary context, is the degree to which he or she will be experienced.
Yeah. That would be the theory evolutionarily, sure.
beyond the physical form.
Yeah. Well,
but interesting that if it was then that the self then there would be less and less personal and collective karma that would be that would be carried along.
Yeah,
at least
exactly. Which I think is very important. It's still carried along.
Yeah.
But you're not responsible for things going on in these other four quadrants. I mean, due diligence and responsibility has to go to people that basically are poisoning the environment, among other things, including poisoning the environment with really mediocre speech and bad jokes. And there's a whole horrifying, the seventh ring of hell is for people that do that. So you have to kind of watch that. But kind of straightening up. You fundamentally know what you're responsible for. Way down deep. You pretty much know whether what's happening to you is something that you pretty much need to own up to. Or if what's happening to you is something that really is fundamentally not of your doing. Way down deep, the authentic self knows, as Andrew uses that. So the more you get in touch with that authentic self, the more you can apportion good and evil in your own life, and that's your virtue. And virtue, along with wisdom, the capacity to understand emptiness, those are the things that go with you. And if nothing else, they go with you from moment to moment, don't they?